I had never thought much of it before. Diane, my stepmom, was always there, always around. At 63, she had an elegance that most women her age didn't have. But tonight, something felt different. My best friend, Matt, had come over, like he usually did. But the way he looked at her, the way she smiled back, there was something between them I hadn't noticed before. It started innocently enough, all of us sitting around the dinner table. But as the night went on, I could sense the tension building. Diane's hand would brush against Matt's as she cleared the table, lingering just a little too long. Matt's eyes followed her as she moved through the room, his gaze lingering on her figure in a way I'd never seen him look at anyone before. After dinner, Diane excused herself to her bedroom. I didn't think much of it, assuming she was just getting ready for bed. But a few minutes later, Matt said he needed to use the bathroom. He walked down the hall, and I didn't think twice. But then I heard it. A soft knock on her bedroom door. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. I waited a few minutes, my curiosity getting the better of me. Slowly, I made my way down the hallway, my footsteps quiet. As I approached the door, I could hear soft murmurs, whispers between them. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my ear to the door. "I shouldn't be here," Matt's voice was barely audible. "Then why did you come?" Diane's voice was soft, seductive. There was a pause, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of lips meeting. My breath caught in my throat as I realized they were kissing. I could picture it in my mind. Matt, my best friend, leaning in, his hands on her waist, pulling her closer. Diane's hands running through his hair, guiding him deeper into the kiss. I knew I should walk away, but I couldn't. My feet were frozen to the floor as I listened to the soft gasps and whispers. The kissing grew more intense, and I could hear the bed creak as they moved onto it. My mind raced with thoughts of what was happening behind that door, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I stood there, helpless, as my best friend and my stepmom crossed a line that could never be undone. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The sounds from the room continued. Soft moans, the rustling of sheets, the creaking of the bed. And then, silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the door, retreating down the hall, my mind reeling from what I had just overheard. When Matt emerged from the bedroom, his face was flushed, and he avoided my gaze. Diane followed a moment later, her hair slightly tousled, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. They both acted as if nothing had happened, but I knew the truth. And from that night on, things were never the same. As they came back into the living room, I pretended not to notice, my heart still racing from what I had just overheard. Matt sat down across from me, his eyes darting everywhere but at mine. Diane, on the other hand, was the picture of calm. She smoothed out her clothes and gave a casual smile, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened just moments ago. "I'm going to bed," Diane said, her voice steady, not betraying a single ounce of guilt. "Good night, boys." Her eyes lingered on Matt for a fraction of a second longer than they should have, and I caught it. She turned and disappeared up the stairs, leaving me and Matt alone in the room, a heavy silence settling between us. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't even know where to start. Matt looked pale, nervous. He ran a hand through his hair and finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened back there." He was trying to make light of it, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. "You don't know what happened?" I shot back, my voice harsher than I intended. "You went into her room, Matt. You know exactly what happened." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and for a moment, I thought he might try to deny it. But instead, he just sighed, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't plan for it to happen, okay? She came on to me, and I didn't stop it." Hearing him admit it made the knot in my stomach tighten even more. I had always trusted Matt. We had been through everything together, and now it felt like he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But even more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about Diane, about how she had initiated it. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, jealousy, confusion. It all swirled together in my head, making it impossible to think straight. "Why her, Matt?" I asked, my voice quieter this time, trying to understand. "Why my stepmom?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the floor for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression a mix of regret and something else. Something darker. "There's just something about her, man," he said quietly. "She's not like other women. The way she looks at you, the way she makes you feel. I don't know how to explain it. I couldn't stop myself." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest again. I wanted to tell him off, to kick him out of my house, but something stopped me. Deep down, I couldn't deny that I had noticed the same things. Diane had a certain allure, an energy that was impossible to ignore. And though I hated to admit it, there had been moments, fleeting, guilty moments, when I had found myself drawn to her in ways that I shouldn't be. But I wasn't like Matt. I had kept my distance, told myself that it was wrong, that it could never happen. And yet, here we were, my best friend confessing that he had crossed that line, and my stepmom, well, she clearly didn't regret it. After a long pause, I finally spoke, my voice low. "You need to leave, Matt." He looked at me, his face full of remorse, but he didn't argue. He knew there was nothing left to say. He got up slowly, grabbed his jacket, and walked to the door. Just before he left, he turned back to me, his expression a mix of guilt and sadness. "I'm sorry, man. I really am." I didn't respond. I just watched as he walked out the door, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. As soon as he was gone, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had overheard. The way Diane had whispered to him. The way their bodies had moved together in the dark. It was wrong. So wrong. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. I couldn't ignore the fact that Diane had chosen Matt, but I couldn't help but wonder if it could have been me. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind playing the events over and over again. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Diane, of her touch, her lips, the way she had looked at Matt. But in my dream, it wasn't Matt. It was me. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Diane didn't come downstairs for breakfast, and I avoided her like the plague. I didn't know what I would say to her if I saw her. But later that afternoon, when I couldn't take the silence anymore, I went up to her room. My heart was pounding in my chest as I knocked softly on the door. "Come in," her voice called from the other side. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Diane was sitting on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair. She looked up at me with that same calm, knowing smile, like she had been expecting me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone soft, almost caring. I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, staring at her, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say. I wanted to ask her why she had done it, why she had chosen Matt. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I found myself moving closer, drawn to her despite everything that had happened. She didn't move, didn't say a word as I stood in front of her, our eyes locked. And then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in, my hand brushing against her cheek, my lips finding hers. For a moment, she didn't respond, but then, slowly, she kissed me back. Her lips were soft, warm, and all the guilt, all the confusion I had been feeling melted away in that single kiss. When we finally pulled apart, I could see the same hunger in her eyes that I had seen in Matt's the night before. But this time, it was for me. "I didn't want it to be him," she whispered, her breath warm against my lips. "I wanted it to be you." Hearing those words sent a shockwave through me. Everything I had felt, every confused, guilty feeling made sense in that moment. Diane had wanted me all along. She had only gone to Matt because she couldn't have me. And now, here we were, crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. I stood there, her words echoing in my mind, the room thick with the weight of everything that had just happened. My heart was racing, my mind torn between what I wanted and what I knew was right. Diane, my stepmom, had just admitted what I had feared all along. This wasn't just some fleeting moment of passion. It was something deeper, something that had been building for a long time. But as I looked into her eyes, that hunger I saw reflected back at me. I realized that this wasn't just about her desires. I had my own feelings to confront too. Feelings I had buried, hidden beneath the surface because I knew how wrong they were. Yet now, everything was out in the open. I took a deep breath, stepping back from her. "We can't do this, Diane," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't right." She looked at me, her expression shifting, the seductive glint in her eyes fading. "I know," she admitted quietly. "I know it's wrong, but—" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "There's something between us. I can't ignore it anymore." I swallowed hard, feeling the pull of her words, but also the weight of the consequences pressing down on me. "You're my stepmom," I said, shaking my head. "We crossed a line, and if we keep going, there's no coming back from this." For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't the confident, alluring woman I had seen before. She was human, flawed, conflicted, just like me. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered, "or Matt, or anyone, but I don't know how to stop these feelings." There was a long silence between us, and in that silence, everything became clear. I had to be the one to put an end to this, not just for her, but for me. I cared about Diane, I couldn't deny that, but what we had done, what had almost happened, wasn't love. It was something else, something born out of loneliness, confusion, and desire. "I think we need some space," I finally said, my voice steady. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a while. We need to figure this out, but not like this." Diane nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand," she said softly. "I'm sorry for everything." Diane's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I felt a surge of emotions, desire, confusion, guilt, all colliding inside me at once. My mind screamed that this was wrong, that I should walk away, but my body wouldn't listen. The intensity of her gaze held me there, like she had been waiting for this moment as long as I had, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself until now. Slowly, I sat down beside her on the bed. Diane reached out, her fingers grazing the back of my neck, pulling me closer. Her touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. I leaned in, my lips brushing hers once more. This time, the kiss was more intense, deeper, filled with a kind of passion that neither of us could control. It was like all the tension from the night before had finally reached its breaking point. As we kissed, her hands moved to my chest, fingers tracing along my skin, making my pulse race. I mirrored her movements, my hands roaming over her back, pulling her into me. The room seemed to fade away as the two of us gave in to something that had been building for far too long. But then, just as quickly as it had started, reality crashed back down on me. I pulled away, breathing heavily, my heart racing. Diane looked at me with a mixture of confusion and desire, her lips still parted from our kiss. "We can't do this," I muttered, standing up abruptly. My mind was spinning. This was my stepmom. How had we gotten here? Diane's expression softened and she sighed, standing up slowly. She approached me carefully, her hand resting gently on my arm. "I know it's complicated," she said quietly, her voice calm and soothing. "But I also know you feel it too." She wasn't wrong. I did feel it. but that didn't make it any less wrong. I don't know what this is or how to deal with it, I admitted, still trying to make sense of everything. Diane smiled softly, her hand trailing down my arm. We don't need to figure everything out right now, she whispered. Let's just take it one step at a time. No pressure, no expectations. I looked at her, torn between the desire that was still coursing through me and the weight of what this meant. I knew we had already crossed a line, but there was no going back now, not after what had happened. And somehow, despite all the guilt and confusion, a part of me didn't want to go back. Diane stepped closer again, her fingers running through my hair as she pressed a soft kiss against my cheek. Let's not overthink it, she murmured, her breath warm against my skin. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My heart was pounding, but something inside me had shifted. Maybe Diane was right. Maybe we didn't need to figure everything out right away. Maybe this was just something that was meant to happen, something we couldn't fight any longer. I nodded, not fully trusting myself to speak. Diane smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. Come on, she said softly, taking my hand. Let's just lie down for a bit. I hesitated for a moment, but then, without another word, I followed her to the bed. As we lay down beside each other, Diane wrapped her arms around me, holding me close. The warmth of her body was both comforting and unsettling. But I couldn't deny the feeling of peace that started to wash over me as I closed my eyes, letting myself drift into the moment. The next few days were strange, to say the least. Matt didn't come around, and I hadn't reached out to him. I didn't know how I could face him after everything that had happened. And as for Diane, things between us had shifted in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. We didn't talk about that night again, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. It was as if we had crossed into a new territory, one where the usual rules no longer applied. Diane was more relaxed around me, more affectionate. A touch here, a lingering glance there. It was subtle, but it was enough to remind me of the connection we had shared. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, she leaned over and kissed me softly on the lips. This time, I didn't pull away. I kissed her back, allowing myself to be lost in the moment again. But then, something unexpected happened. Diane pulled away slightly, looking into my eyes with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. We need to talk about this, she said quietly. I know this thing between us is real, but we also need to think about where it's going. I swallowed hard, knowing she was right. Whatever this was, it couldn't stay hidden forever. And the truth was, we couldn't keep living in this bubble. I don't regret what happened, she continued, her voice steady. But I don't want to hurt you, or Matt, or anyone else. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time I realized the weight of the situation. It wasn't just about us. This had consequences, big ones. And sooner or later, we'd have to face them. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I'm so confused. Diane reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. We'll figure it out, she said softly. But for now, let's take some time. No rushing. We need to be honest with ourselves about what this is and what it's not. I nodded, grateful for her calm approach. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We didn't have all the answers yet, but at least we were on the same page. Over the next few weeks, things between us calmed down. The intense passion was still there, but we were more careful, more thoughtful. We talked more openly, tried to understand what had drawn us together in the first place. It wasn't just physical, though that was a big part of it. There was something deeper, a connection that had been building for years without either of us realizing it. Eventually, we agreed to keep things quiet for now, to give ourselves space to think and decide what we really wanted. Diane and I both knew that what we had wasn't sustainable, not in the long run. But we also knew that whatever happened, we couldn't go back to the way things were before. We had changed, and so had our relationship. As the weeks passed, I found a sense of peace in that understanding. Diane and I weren't rushing into anything anymore. We were taking it slow, letting things unfold naturally. And while the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. Whatever path we chose, we would face it together with honesty and understanding.